and council housing in particular. So Martin, over to you, and thank you. You're muted, Martin.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I guess the first thing to be said is that what's driving the government housing programme is a desperate chase after their target of 1.5 million homes over a parliament. And it's quite clear that literally anything which adds to the numbers will do. For example, permitted development rights were introduced by the Tories to, funnily enough, drive up their house building to a 300,000 target. And it involved the converting of offices and commercial premises to housing without having to apply for planning permission. Mr. Matthew Pennycook in March 24 denounced PDR as producing poor quality and slum housing. But instead of ending it, they've decided to carry on with it, which is a fairly outrageous decision. You will have heard about the cutting of the affordable target in London from 35 to 20%. And also the government is proposing to give developers the freedom to dispense with the affordable component of Section 106 agreements, ostensibly where they have difficulty selling them as they currently are to councils or housing associations. So they'll be allowed to sell them on the market. Since more than 40% of so-called affordable housing is produced by Section 106 agreements, it's guarantees that the numbers will decline as a result of government concessions to the developers and big builders. And the most recent news is in relation to developments of 150 plus homes. It turns out that devolution actually means all power to Steve Reed, who wants to force councils to send them up to him, and he will run them through. These have been presented as temporary measures until the market improves. Implicitly, they're accepting that so-called affordable housing is dependent on market conditions rather than government investment. So what's in the newly published Social and Affordable Homes Programme? Well, the outline is pretty much as previously announced, which is 30,000 affordable homes a year. That's just 10% of their 300,000 target. Of that, 18,000 is supposed to be social rent homes, which is just 6%. Now, in England, there have been only 6 years when the number of homes built has been 300,000 or more. All of them in the 1960s. And the lowest percentage of homes which were council housing in those years was 38%, or 114,000. So there's a big gulf between that 18,000 and historical precedent. The government says that 60% of its programme of funding should be social rent. How they're going to achieve that is questionable, since it's likely that developers, big builders, will insist that 60% means that projects are unviable, which is to say the profit margin is not enough. Will the government back down again in the face of a developer's strike? The other thing, despite all talk of, you remember Angela Rayner going on about a council housing revolution, in this programme, there's no funding specifically for council housing and no council housing target. So councils will have to compete with each other, with housing associations, with house builders and developers, and for so-called for-profit providers. What level of grant will be available? Well, we don't know because the government has said that there will be no standard grant, even as a rough guide. So bidders will have to be bidding in the dark. And the government says, and I quote, bidders will be expected to take all reasonable measures to minimise the level of grant funding requested and maximise their own contribution. That suggests that they're going to be they're going to tend towards taking the lowest bids. Regeneration funding from this program will be available for regeneration on the basis that it will increase the amount of available affordable homes. Now, given the fact that the Tory definition of affordable housing remains in place, you could see a decline in the number of council and social rent homes, but there are ostensibly more affordable homes, be it affordable rent or shared ownership. Regeneration and densification only mean one thing: more expensive housing, more profit for builders and developers, and less genuinely affordable housing. So clearly we should oppose funding going to regeneration. Acquisitions. The government says the programme will support a limited number of acquisitions without any detail. By acquisitions, the council's buying housing on the market, often ex-council stock. It's not clear whether this applies just to the funding from the Social and Affordable Homes Programme or housing revenue accounts spending under their own steam. And over the last 5 years, 43% of additional council homes have been bought by councils, usually by a combination of right to buy receipts and their own resources. As it's rather frustrating for councils to be buying homes which have been given away cheaply at market rates, but financially it makes sense when faced with the very high costs of new build. But anyway, it should be up to councils to determine what they do, not the government. When the government announced their 39 billion funding, we were told by some that the programme would be transformational. It would be a game changer. It's nothing of the sort. It's clear the government is relying on the market to resolve the housing crisis, when in reality, we know that the large volume builders are only going to be building at a pace and scale which maximises their returns. So we need to challenge much of the content of this programme, and we need to campaign around a number of things. First of all, 90,000 plus social rent homes a year, which number which Shelter and other organisations has raised. We need not 39 billion, but if we're going to have a large scale council house building programme in particular, we need more than 100 billion over 10 years. All the funding should go to social rent. The government should abandon the Tory definition of affordable housing, stop funding affordable rent and shared ownership, and end PDR. No funding should go to for-profit providers. They also need to end the freeze of LHA and pay councils the cost of temporary accommodation. And they need to give housing revenue accounts the funding needed to maintain and improve existing housing. Without that funding, they won't be able to decarbonise on any scale. So overall, we have to demand that the government breaks with its failed approach and makes council housing its first housing priority. Obviously, they're not listening, but it will become ever more obvious that their housing strategy cannot resolve the housing crisis, and we need to build the broadest movement to campaign for these demands, in particular to put councillors and MPs under pressure. We also need to put special effort into demanding that the trade unions wake up on this issue. It's their members who are suffering the consequences of the housing crisis. Final comment on local authorities. I think we should say to councils, they've tried the route of private discussions in the corridors of power, and the government is simply not listening. They need to take their place with tenants, housing campaigns, and trade unions in building the sort of pressure which was built in relation to the winter fuel payment and disability benefits. The government is, as many of you will no doubt agree, opening the way to Farage or some amalgam with the Tories. Now, beginning to resolve the housing crisis would be one means of stopping the election of a very right-wing government, which will certainly be a threat to existing council housing. I'll leave it there.
That is brilliant, Martin. Thanks for giving us such a comprehensive assessment of this programme. That was brilliant. Just before I open it up to questions, you just want to remind people that Martin and Paul Burnham put together a statement, which we now have it online, calling on the government to abandon the 10-year above inflation rent rises. So really urge members here to sign it if I haven't already, but also to share it. And obviously, I'm going to open it up and shut up. So I can't see who went first. So I'm going to call Charles, Marion, then Michael.
Thank you, Morag, and thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, you're spot on. I must have, I had a look through the document, and I obviously didn't do it as thorough as you have, but I think your observations are spot on. This myth of affordability doesn't relate prices to incomes, and the only way you can test whether something's affordable is relating the prices to household incomes. Now, the whole thing about viability, I don't know how they do the calculate. Well, I do a bit. I've been looking at uh, financial viability analyses that developers do, and I'm sure they overstate the costs of building, because to build a block of flats 10, 20, 30 stories high has got to introduce economies of scale, and they don't seem to be evident in the affordability analysis. And we have been working in conjunction with Professor Stephen Walker, um, who and we're quite alarmed to see how easily these FVAs, financial viability analyses, are accepted by local councils, and they employ a so-called independent consultant, DVS, District Value of Services, and they kind of virtually just nod it through. Um, so, so this does seem to be. Well, I think the people that fund um, housing seem to be marketing most of these flats in the Middle East, and they're marketed offshore as luxury apartments, and I think perhaps the people behind the funding are very resistant to having any of these as affordable, because it just was their model. Um, so yeah, I really do support your call for more council housing.
Brilliant. Thanks. Thanks, Charles. Michael Ball.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. That was fantastic, and I wrote down loads of stuff. I got lots of interesting thoughts about it. But one thing I really am not sure about is why they're doing this. This 1.5 million target. It's ludicrous. It's not. It's nonsense. It doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense when it was first announced. It didn't make sense before it was announced. And I think there's something else going on here, which is I spoke to Peter Apps, for example, who said this at the time when they a few weeks ago when Steve Reed announced those cuts to 20% affordable housing in London proposals. His view was that they were trying to, and I've picked this up from several people, they were trying to satisfy the OBR, but they really were going to get growth. So they were going to do all these things, and it really was going to lead to growth. And therefore the OBR would not give them such a negative downplay, and they'll be able to be have the budget that they want. So that's what and I thought that was credible. What's extraordinary is that the OBR made very clear last year that although they thought that actually they could meet 1.3 million, they couldn't meet 1.5 million, but they thought they could meet 1.3 million, which is obviously still completely bananas. But the OBR themselves said this is not going to solve the housing crisis at all. It will bring prices down by 0.8% against the headwind of how much prices are going up. So it's absolutely it's a P against a steam train. It's nonsense in terms of solving the crisis. Now, and they just sort of ignored that and they buried that. So I don't think they cannot believe this nonsense that somehow this is going to solve the housing crisis. They don't believe it. They are just going along with the current position that's been in play for 25 plus years of speculative house building somehow being a positive thing. And I think that there comes a point where we need to be absolutely clear that it's not that I read something recently yesterday about the London councils recently just published something, and other people were saying why haven't they learned? This isn't working. It hasn't worked. It's not a matter of them not learning. I think they know perfectly well. I think they're taking us for a ride. They're taking the country for a ride. They're pretending that they care. They're pretending that they really want to solve this problem and they're going to do this. And if they just do this, this, and this, then it will solve the problem. Everybody knows that it can't be done. Everybody knows it's not going to solve the problem. Their OBR says that. Endless numbers of other people say that. And clearly the evidence of the last 25 years plus shows that. So it's a difficult thing to say, and it might not be the right thing to say because it might actually, cause split. What we want to get in March is a united front, and it might be a difficult message to swallow. But actually, this is a deliberate manipulation of the truth, and they know perfectly well what they're doing. This isn't something like if we just tell them and we give them the right stuff, they might wake up. So that's for me a really important thing to think about. The other thing is that the Steve Reed and his mad centralising and his let's face it, he's changed his name to Steve Trump. He's announced another set of things as well as the 20% in the last few days, 20% affordable housing reduction. Those things are no detail has been provided. They haven't actually got on with doing a consultation, which is required, which they said they were going to do. But actually, what they're in terms of the changing the affordability criteria in London from 35% to 20%, they are doing something I think which is illegal. And I've spoken to planning lawyers who think that could be the case as well, and we could have a judicial review on Steve Reed's attempt to do this. And maybe that's why there's a delay, why they haven't gone on with consulting, because it's not straightforward. You cannot, their own laws say you cannot change policy by ministerial fiat. And even their own policy doesn't fit in with this, because the NPPF doesn't fit in with what they're trying to do. So although they've been announcing this stuff, I don't know how much they're going to really follow through on some of it. All of that, of course, is sideways to what the key stuff that Martin really unpicked, and I'm really grateful for what you did in unpicking it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michael. Just to add, Martin's document was attached, which again goes in detail, covering a lot of the issues Martin raised today, but there is a document in the email. It's at the bottom of the email that I sent out with the Zoom meeting. I'm going to call Marion now, and after Marion will be Paul Berman. So Marion, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you, Martin. That was absolutely brilliant. And I do want to read everything. I just got a bit confused at one point when you were talking about how there was only going to be 6% of the projected 300 houses a year built. Then you said something about the government is asking for 60%. Maybe I misheard it. I wasn't sure what the 60% of what was what. And just a comment, I used to, when I was working as an academic, we used to run a project for planners on providing a sort of regen schemes with housing in it. And I was totally shocked and using the financial valuers, spreadsheets to work out how much things cost and so on. And I was really shocked to learn that valuers value existing council homes as nil for these regeneration schemes, which I don't know if that's still going on. This was about 10 years ago, but this just strikes me as being absolutely appalling. And, there is some work to be done on valuations and surveying and costs and how these things are calculated.
Thanks, Marion. I'm going to take Paul, and I'm afraid Paul's going to be the last contribution on this. I'm going to get Martin to come back because it's nearly 11:45 now. But Martin, just if you can have a look, there are a couple of questions in the chat, which I can read them out, but if you want to have a quick look. Paul?
Oh yeah, following what previous speakers have said, I think it's really significant that what we're seeing is a shift in the purpose of housing. It's something that's been going on for a long time. Previous governments increasingly have said that housing is no longer about meeting people's needs. It's no longer about housing households and families and the like. It's actually simply a form of economic activity, a bit like health service activity in the United States. Health service activity in the United States is not based on improving the health of the people. There are no targets for that. It's simply about the turnover of the health monopolies. And essentially the same process has been going on in the UK around housing in particular. And what we're seeing at the moment is a turbocharging of it. And I think this is most clear around the issue of acquisitions. In other words, we can build, or you can acquire, we can have the extra council houses that we need through two sources. One is from building them, and the other one is from purchasing houses that already exist, repurposing market housing as council housing. And the preference which we ought to have is very, very clear. We should be preferring acquisitions. We don't want to destroy the environment. We don't want to buy into the developers and the construction companies' agenda. Build, demolish, build, demolish, build, demolish. Money, money, money. No, let's do two things. Let's scrap the right to buy, and then let's have government level match funding for remunicipalisation of the existing stock by buying back those right to buy homes which come up on the market. There's so many of them. in this country that there must be very large numbers coming onto the market in every week, every month, every year, and these are the lower quartile market properties. It makes sense to bring them back. So as well as not destroying the environment, we have no need to plan them. We have no need to build more buildings in across the urban environment, where currently we have open spaces, we have green spaces and the like. We don't need to do that, and the management infrastructure is already in place. In other words, if you've got a council housing estate with 100 flats on it, probably you've got these days, you've got 60 tenants and 40 leaseholders. If that was to become, in 5 years' time, was to be 70 tenants and 30 leaseholders, the economies of scale in terms of managing it all makes sense. And of course, going back to where I was going and what Michael Ball was talking about, quite frankly, it's the marketisation agenda which says that no, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do the sensible thing, and the thing which would deliver more affordable homes faster. They're just going to be obsessed with numbers, and you can see how the numbers targets are often problematic, aren't they? We've seen problematic targets throughout our lives over the last few decades. So not only have a numbers target, you have a 10-year blind numbers target, and that means a mass build of unaffordable housing. So it is time for a change in policy, and I think we should focus on the issue of acquisitions as a way of showing how their policies are so wrong, and how a quick, efficient alternative is there in terms of an acquisitions program. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Some brilliant contributions there. And as I say, Martin, there's quite a few questions and contributions. So I'm going to hand over to you to sum up on this section.
Okay, sorry if I wasn't clear on the some of these stats. 1.5 million, 5 years, that's the 300,000 on average target. The social and affordable homes programme is 30,000 affordable homes a year. So that's 10% of their 300,000 target. And the 18,000 social rent homes is equivalent to 6% of their target. I mean, it just emphasises how the gap between their aspirations, leave aside the question of what affordable is, and what is actually needed. The 60%, the government is saying that 60% of affordable homes under their programme should go to social rent. Although you have to ask the question, is Homes England going to demand that every bid includes 60% social rent? I would be very surprised. And I think because the government has made concessions in London and elsewhere, we'll see developers and builders trying to pressure the government to cut down on that. Michael's question, I think fundamentally they don't understand the economics of housing. I mean, their position essentially is that you liberalise planning law, and that will lead to an increase and a speeding up of planning permissions, and following from that, they'll start building a lot more, which is complete nonsense. We know that there are somewhere in the region of 1.4 million plots of land which have already got planning permission and haven't been built on. When you have a housing market which is dominated by about half a dozen big builders, there is no competition. and they'll do what the hell they want. So I think it's complete ignorance on the part of the government, which is the fundamental problem. When you come to targets, it's interesting that I've written something about the 45-50 government, and the Tories were telling Bevan to set a target, and he said, no, I'm not setting a target. It would be ridiculous. The only thing he did set a target for was 4 council homes for every private home, and private developers had to get a license to build that. In relation to what Paul said, well, Peter Rapps raised this a couple of weeks ago, the idea of municipalisation. And in fact, on a small scale, that's what councils are actually doing. As I mentioned earlier on, 43% of all the additional homes that have been added to council stock have been bought on the market. And when you're having to pay more than £300,000 to build a new property, it makes sense, so long as the condition of the stock you're buying is reasonable, and it might require a bit of work, putting in a new bathroom or a kitchen, whatever, but it makes sense, and that's why they're doing it, as well as the fact that there's so little grant for house building. Don't know whether I missed anything out there.
I think we're going to maybe need to revisit this, Martin, because I think lots of different questions. So I think it's something that we're going to maybe have to come back to and revisit if you're happy to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Brilliant. Okay. I am going to move on, and I think the next 2 items on the agenda really fit with Martin and what Martin and others have contributed in terms